The National Fire Service, or NFS, was the single fire service created in Great Britain in August of 1941. The NFS had full-time and part-time members, male and female. Its uniform was the traditional dark blue double-breasted tunic. War service meant considerable risk, and members of the NFS were called to attend the aftermath of German bombing raids and coastal shelling from France, or often whilst these attacks were still ongoing. Casualties were inevitable, and there is one record of one volunteer who died on duty aged just 19. In March of 1944, a call went out throughout the NFS for volunteers to join a secret new unit designated the Overseas Contingent. The story of the NFS Overseas Contingent is little known and rarely told. As its name implied, this new unit was being formed to cross the Channel, following up the advancing troops in Normandy and providing firefighting and fire prevention service to the Allied armies. Women were barred from applying, and male applicants had to be between the ages of 19 and 41. Applicants came forward in large numbers, but the selection process was rigorous and many of them failed. The firefighters that were successfully recruited into the new contingent were undoubtedly an elite unit, and they were issued with shoulder flashes with the words Overseas Contingent, together with other variants from the standard NFS uniform, such as a beret. The special training given to members of the Overseas Contingent was aimed at bringing them to a high level of physical fitness. In many ways, it mimicked the training given to soldiers attached to commando units, except, of course, that no weapon training was given to the firemen. The training even included sessions in foreign languages, German and French. The advanced element of the training involved the NFS men being instructed in how to embark their pumps and other vehicles on landing craft and disembark them in France. In the British government, there was much thought having to be given to the legal status of the overseas contingent if elements of it were deployed right behind the fighting forces. What would happen to NFS men that might be captured by the enemy? In the end, it was decided to give the overseas contingent the status of persons following the fighting forces as defined in the Army Act. It was hoped that should any NFS men fall into the hands of the German forces, they would not be shot but treated as prisoners of war. The contingent was organized into columns, each mobile being equipped to be as self-sufficient as possible. Each column consisted of an HQ company and 5 companies, each of which had 2 sections, making a total of about 520 officers and men. Gradually, the manpower of the contingent was brought up to full strength, but only after the ban on recruiting volunteers from London and the Midlands was lifted. This ban was imposed so as not to seriously deplete the NFS in these high-risk areas of the country. However, it was later realized that it was within these areas that lay the greatest experience in dealing with fires caused by enemy action, and hardened firemen were welcomed into the overseas contingent. The D-Day landing date, 6th of June 1944, came closer and closer, and a decision had to be made on whether or not to deploy 1 or more columns of the NFS to support the invasion forces. The High Command of the British Army soon made their feelings known that they did not want the responsibility of looking after the NFS men as the liberation of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands gathered pace. As a result, in October of 1944, 4 of the 5 columns were stood down, leaving just one, column number 4. This one continued to train and saw active service between D-Day and January of 1945 in and around London as a mobile unit. However, the US Army took an opposing view and stated that they would welcome NFS support. In January of 1945, one column of the overseas contingent was sent to France. The column was attached to the 12th US Army Group, and contemporary reports show that the NFS and US Army personnel soon struck up a very effective working relationship. The serious impact that loss of fuel and ammunition through fire could have on the Allied campaign was very much understood by the Americans, and the potential for disastrous fires was massive. Ammo dumps ranged in size from a small railroad to 25 square miles. The risk of explosion and fire must have been enormous, and so it is little wonder that the US Army was so glad to have the overseas contingent working with them at such sites. The NFS column soon found that its resources were severely stretched, with its pumps and crews being scattered over an area of 30,000 square miles. By the time the column was sent home, the most northern element of it was stationed actually inside Germany, and the most southern was around Verdun in France. So much useful work for the overseas contingent was found that it raises doubts about the decision to only send one column overseas. Hundreds of major incidents were dealt with by the overseas contingent, and the number of fires they prevented is incalculable. The relationship between the US Army and the British firemen grew so closely that the NFS men temporarily adopted US Army ranks to avoid confusion. After 7 months of hectic activity, the column was finally withdrawn on the 15th of July 1945, and they returned to England.